Hello, and we're going to be doing one of my really rare random cryptozoology A to Z files. Um, they are sort of things that I do when I've got enough time to do, or I've just got the impetus to do it. And yeah, so I'm trying to do them alphabetically, and the last one was C for Chupacabra, and this one is D. Now, the creature has a specific name in Irish, and as much as my family is Irish, I cannot pronounce this word correctly. I can get close, but I'll say this much, I'm very much phonetic when I read, so I used to read it as Dobhar Chú. Now, of course, I know the CHU with the little flick is actually a coo sound, and that's dog. And Doa, the bit I read as Dobar is either Doa or Do. I think it's Doa, so it's a Doaku we're talking about. So, as you can tell, I've probably pronounced it badly already, but yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. So, one morning in 1722, by the generally quiet Glenade Loch, a young lady named Grace has gone to go do the laundry. It's a normal day, and Grace goes about things as she always does, scrubbing the hose of her husband and minding her own business. Her husband Terence is strolling towards the shore himself, eager to see what she's up to because he was quite sure he thought he heard a noise. As he gets closer, he begins to hear the mad screaming that can only belong to his wife. Knowing that anything could be happening to her, Terence gallops down to the shore, skidding along the bank and calling out for Grace, desperate for her to respond as the screams and wails suddenly seem to stop. When Terence reaches the lake shore, he's assuming to see the worst, but not to see what he has. A creature that could best be described as a giant otter lounging over Grace. It is in fact having a nap on her bloody savage body with blood smearing its whiskered face. Terence is overcome with horror and shock. He has never seen anything like this before, and he turns on his heel, galloping up towards his house in desperate search of a weapon. He mumbles and swears to God over and over as he hunts for the dagger, his mind reeling for the fact his wife must be dead, and with the amount of blood, and worse still, there is a monster there. Terence reached the slumbering beast with his dagger, and began to stab it over and over again as it shrieked, and then began to give out whistles. As he continues to stab it over and over, the cries of fury from him arouse the neighbours, who come to see what is happening. As they arrive, the beast drops dead, but its whistling cries have attracted its mate, and Terence is in battle with the second. This being has more energy than its dead mate and is harder to kill. Stabbing and slashing at the creature and getting bloodied himself, Terence manages, after a long battle, to kill the second beast with the help of his neighbours, but his wife is dead, and in front of them are two giant otters that none of them have ever seen before. This is the legend, although the legend debates on whether he heard his wife screaming or came down in the evening to look for her when she didn't come home, let alone that it's debatable whether his neighbours helped. The creature, named the Doaku, or water dog, that's the translation, is a very bizarre animal to say the least. I first found out about it reading a book on cryptids by Dr. Carl Shuker, someone I would suggest anyone interested in cryptids should go and check out, just like Lauren Coleman. But anyway, the story comes from a gravestone in County Leitrim, where the grave image of the Doaku is pictured recumbent and not exactly like how others describe it through different versions of the story. Now, firstly, most assume the Doaku is a giant otter, referred to sometimes as a king otter, and though some things say it's in Irish and Scottish folklore, its existence seems only to come from this one grave. It's perhaps a little like the Enfield, a purely heraldic animal, but it's obvious that the idea of the water creature that attacked the woman too close to shore is not uncommon in these regions, such as the Kelpie or its Irish equivalent, which I cannot say. It's written in the script, but I cannot say that particular word. It's a great example of the kind of water monster. However, the Doaku is just a very confusing thing to look into. Upon the stone it's on, the animal has the limbs of a dog, but then a long tail with a tuft, and well, to look at the stone that shows the beast with the seeming axe coming out of it, it actually reminds me more of a bad image of a wolf. Really, the image on the stone is seen as the proof to match the tale about the death. Like a lot of stories passed down mostly through oral tradition, with this kind of image engraved as the base to tell from. It's all rather skewed and altered. Over the years, the story and beast description has very much become that of a giant otter. Certainly, the name and later descriptions that it was over 7 foot long and had a head like a dog, but resembling otter and some half dog and half fish. The actual answer to the question of what the Doaku is, well, it's a bit of a question. For one, a Dr. Catherine Briggs in 1959 added to the mythology with the thought of it being a king otter that was once said to have been seen holding court to smaller otters around it. It was from this work later in the 1990s that another author reiterated this idea, but then came up with the description of it being white with a black cross on its back and almost like a giant ermine, which I have found no other source stating this description from this book titled Myth, Legend and Romance, an encyclopedia of the Irish folk tradition. But it has pertained in every other source on the internet since then, and everyone is describing the creature. Everyone else describing the creature often uses this white with a black cross. Perhaps it was added in the retelling of the story to the author, as a lot of the story is really quite embellished and different from different sources, but all the same, I would suggest anyone reading about it to check out Carl Shuker and his work on it, as it was actually the first time I'd ever heard about it in the 2010s. Anyway, initially I considered whether it could be a giant otter, be an otter. Giant otters exist, but only in South America. European river otters are big and pretty damn aggressive if you piss them off, particularly if it's a mother with youngsters and you look like a threat. They're also much bigger than you tend to assume when they run at you, but although I would not be surprised by the thought of it being instead a very gnarly badger, it's not what I would assume to be the answer. I do not think it was an otter or a giant otter. Ireland is pretty restrictive with what animals exist there, and certainly a giant otter would be a stretch, let alone one that works in a pair. I considered seals and sea lions. Well, there are no sea lions in the Irish Sea, and it happened in a lake. Although I considered the idea of it being a seal particularly because that always seemed a likely possibility, as seals are also aggressive with nasty teeth and capable of ripping you apart if you just can't get away from them. I then pondered over and how once again it was spotted around lakes, and there's now lake population. There's no lake population of seals in Ireland, according to according to the Irish Independent paper, the Dowaku was actually witnessed in a number of lakes around the area. There's a thought that an ancient otter might be the source of the mythology. Now, otters have been radiocarbon dated to having been in Ireland along with badgers since the Bronze Age, but the giant 100-pound otter ancestor mentioned in the article is a fossil from China, and it's thought lion-sized otters once wandered Africa and perhaps Eurasia. But I don't think that is the answer to this mystery. My thoughts is going back to the image on the stone again, though my thoughts are maybe it was maybe it was some nasty feral dogs that had been playing in the water and then attacked his wife. That's if we think the death. That's if we think that the death of Grace was by an animal attack. My actual personal thoughts on the death that triggered this is more that the husband murdered her and came up with a story, and then it just evolved into something different. However, if it is an animal that did this, I would think feral dogs are the more likely cause. But that doesn't mean I don't like the thought of it being a giant killer otter. Certainly, there's a report about a man and dog being attacked near a lake in County Mayo recorded in 1684, denoting an otter-like beast that is then described as a slimy greyhound without hair. And this report, which is rather vivid, might be where some of the ideas of the embellishments of the story come from, but doesn't specify if it was an otter or not an otter. The thought that out there could be or could have been an otter that could kill and eat people, I actually rather like that thought. Considering everyone else in Europe can say wolves, bears, and whatnot, otters and badgers are the most fearsome natural predator in Ireland. And it is an interesting thought if one of them did go that kind of evil. Uh, that would be an interesting sort of horror film to do the evil King Otter. Yeah. Certainly, it's something. Thinking about it and being a fan of Redwall as a kid, you'd have thought that could have been an interesting aspect to Redwall mythology. I digress. But the Doaku is the image on the tombstone. I really struggle to see that as an otter if you just look from the tombstone. But think what you will. But don't get me wrong, I like the King Otter story. It's actually a cryptid because it's linked to one specific incident, just like Black Shuck. So I don't tend to just I don't just flick it off into folklore because, to be honest, I've not heard of it outside of this one gravestone. I've not heard others talk about it or its presence in any text before you then before the 90s, before there was a lot more interest in talking about these things. So, but I'll leave it at that and leave it to your opinions. But certainly, I would like to think that the Dawaku is actually a giant evil otter that eats people. It would certainly make things more interesting. Thank you for listening.